10 years ago, a group of girls in my high school made it their personal mission to make my life a living hell, all because I was fat. Tonight, 3 of them are sitting in the third row of this auditorium, notebooks open and pens poised, having paid $150 each for a ticket to hear me tell them how to unlock their own potential. Hi everyone, and welcome back. For those who are new to our community, my name is Zoe, and I'm 28 years old. Today, I'm a writer, a keynote speaker, and a woman who is deeply in love with the life she has built. But the story of how I got here is written on some of the most scarred, tender, and hidden parts of my soul. It's a story I've had to excavate from the ruins of my own adolescence. This is a secret I kept locked away for over a decade. Seriously? Because there is a unique kind of shame that comes from being bullied in school. It's not like adult conflict. It happens during the most formative years of your life, the time when you are trying to figure out who you are. The cruelty of other kids doesn't just hurt you, it shapes you. It becomes the background noise of your identity, the ghost in the machine of your self-esteem. You carry those voices with you into every job interview, every first date, every time you look in the mirror for years to come. You feel permanently stained by their judgment. For the longest time, I believed those voices. I believed that, because my body was bigger, my worth was smaller. I believed I deserved the isolation, the whispers, the cruel jokes. I believed I was fundamentally flawed, a walking punchline in a world of effortlessly perfect, popular people. That belief is a prison. Oh my gosh, it's a prison with invisible bars, and you are both the inmate and the warden. You start to police your own joy, to shrink your own ambitions, to silence your own voice, because a part of you is terrified that if you get too loud or too bright, they'll notice you again and the punishment will resume. But this isn't just a story about the pain of being the fat kid. This is a story about what happens when you finally stop running from the ghosts of your past and turn around to face them. It's a story about how I found my voice, not in spite of my scars, but because of them. It's about realizing that the very things they tried to destroy in me, my sensitivity, my quiet introspection, my different way of seeing the world, were actually my superpower. This is the story of how I took every single stone they threw at me and used it to build my own stage. The journey was a long, slow, 10-year war. It was fought not in dramatic confrontations, but in quiet libraries, in lonely college dorm rooms, and in the terrifying vulnerability of speaking my truth to a small handful of people, and then a few more, and then a few more. It was a battle to unlearn a decade of shame and to find the woman who had been buried underneath it all. I just know. There are people watching this right now who are still haunted by the ghosts of their own high school hallways. The names they called you, the way they laughed, the crushing feeling of being invisible and monstrously visible all at once. I see you. I remember what it felt like. And I'm telling you this story to show you that those ghosts only have the power you give them. So, before we step into the time machine and go back to the brutal, fluorescent lit world of high school, I need to ask for your help in building our community of survivors right here. If any of this feels familiar, if you know what it's like to fight those old voices, please take a second to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. It's a smaller act that sends a huge message. We are not defined by our past pain. Your support gives me the courage to share the full, unedited story of my own personal war. Okay, let's go back. Let's go back to a 15-year-old girl who believed her voice didn't matter. My story, the one that really matters, starts when I was 15, in the brutal, unforgiving ecosystem of Northwood High School. High school is a battlefield for everyone, I know. But when you're the fat kid, you're walking onto that battlefield with no armor, no weapons, and a giant target painted on your back. My life at home was quiet, and for the most part, safe. My parents were good people, but they were always busy, working long hours to make ends meet. They loved me, I knew that, but they were tired. Their love was a warm, quiet blanket, not a fierce, protective shield. I spent a lot of time alone in my room, a room that was my sanctuary. It was filled with books. I would lose myself for hours in tales of fantasy and adventure, worlds where the heroines were judged by their courage, not their dress size. And I wrote. I had a stack of worn, dog-eared journals filled with my thoughts, my stories, my secret poems. Writing was the only place where I felt my true self could exist without judgment. It was the only place I had a voice. My fatness wasn't the result of a single dramatic event. It was a slow accumulation, a fortress I had built around myself brick by brick. I was a shy, anxious kid, and the social minefield of school was terrifying. Food became my only reliable friend. A bad day at school, a feeling of crushing loneliness on a Friday night, the sting of being picked last in gym class. All of it could be soothed by the warm, predictable comfort of a bag of chips or a sleeve of cookies. It was a vicious cycle. My anxiety made me eat, and the eating made my body a target, which in turn made my anxiety worse. I wasn't just fat. I was fortified against a world that I felt was constantly sizing me up and finding me wanting. And then there were the architects of my misery, Jessica, Tiffany, and Brittany. The holy trinity of Northwood High's popular crowd. Jessica was the queen bee, a girl blessed with the kind of effortless, sun-kissed blonde beauty and sharp-witted confidence that made her a natural leader. Tiffany and Brittany were her loyal, perfectly coiffed lieutenants, echoing her laughter and amplifying her cruelty. In the beginning, their torment wasn't even personal. It was casual, almost thoughtless. It was the low-level, ambient cruelty of the popular towards the invisible. It would be a snicker as I walked past them in the hallway, a whispered comment followed by a burst of laughter in the cafeteria. They had a whole repertoire of names for me. Zoe the ogre, Porky Pig, the walking walrus. The names would change, but the sting was always the same. It was a constant reminder of my status, a public declaration that I was less than them. I learned to navigate the school hallways like a strategist, plotting routes that would avoid their usual hangouts, keeping my head down, making myself as small as a 200-pound girl could possibly be. I mastered the art of invisibility. And this is where my key supporter comes in. A quiet, unassuming man who threw me a lifeline without even knowing it. His name was Mr. Harrison, and he was my sophomore English teacher. He was a kind, rumpled man who always seemed to have chalk dust on his elbows and a genuine, fiery passion for literature. He was the kind of teacher who didn't just teach books. He taught you how to see the world through them. He was the only person in that entire school who didn't see me as a body. He saw me as a mind. Our first major assignment was to write a personal essay. I poured my heart into it. I wrote about the feeling of being invisible, about the sanctuary I found in books and in my own secret writing. I didn't mention the bullying directly, but I wrote around the edges of it, describing the loneliness and the feeling of being an outsider. I handed it in, terrified that I had revealed too much. A week later, Mr. Harrison handed back our graded essays. He stood at the front of the class, my paper in his hand. My heart was pounding. My palms were sweating. I was sure he was going to say something about how depressing it was. "I want to read you all something," he said, his voice quiet but commanding. "This is a piece of writing that is not just good for a high school student. It is good, period." And he began to read. He read my words. My secret, hidden, vulnerable words. He read them to the entire class, including Jessica and her friends, who were sitting in the back, looking bored. As he read, the room went quiet. I could feel people turning to look at me, but for the first time, their stares weren't filled with mockery. They were filled with a surprised, dawning respect. When he finished, he looked directly at me. Jessica was glaring, a look of pure, venomous jealousy on her face. "Zoe," Mr. Harrison said, his kind eyes meeting mine. "You have a powerful voice, a writer's voice. It's clear, it's honest, and it matters." He paused, letting the words sink in. "Don't ever let anyone convince you to be silent. Not ever." In that moment, I felt a flicker of pride so intense it almost made me cry. He had given me a gift more precious than an A. He had given me validation. He had told me that the one part of me that was truly mine, my mind, my words, was valuable. It was a tiny seed of self-worth planted in the barren desert of my self-esteem. But that moment also had a terrible, unintended consequence. It put me on Jessica's radar. I was no longer just an invisible fat girl she could mock for sport. I was a threat. I had received praise from a teacher she respected, in a subject she thought she was good at, and she could not let that stand. The casual cruelty escalated into a targeted, vicious campaign. She had found my weakness, my one point of pride, and she was determined to destroy it. She turned my one moment of validation into the catalyst for my deepest humiliation. The war for my soul had begun, and I had no idea how to fight back. I was about to learn just how cruel a teenage girl with a bruised ego could be. The aftermath of Mr. Harrison reading my essay was not what I had hoped. The brief, warm glow of validation was quickly extinguished by the cold, hard reality of Jessica's wrath. I had been given a voice, and she was determined to make me regret ever using it. The ambient noise of her bullying sharpened into a laser-focused, personal attack. It started subtly. In English class, whenever I would raise my hand to answer a question, Jessica would let out a loud, theatrical sigh, as if my participation were a profound inconvenience to her. If I read a passage aloud, she and her friends would exchange smirks, their shoulders shaking with silent, mocking laughter. It was a constant, low-level campaign of psychological warfare designed to make me feel stupid, to make me doubt myself, to make me shut up. And it worked. I started speaking less in class. I would know the answer, the words burning on my tongue, but the fear of their reaction would keep them locked in my throat. I began to retreat back into my shell, just as she wanted. That wasn't enough for her. My silence wasn't enough. She wanted to humiliate me. The cafeteria became a daily theater of torment. They would accidentally trip near my table, sending a spray of milk or soda onto my books. "Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry," Jessica would say, her voice dripping with fake, exaggerated concern. "It's just, you're so big. You create your own gravitational pull. I couldn't help it." And her friends would erupt in peals of laughter, their cruelty disguised as a shared joke. I would just sit there, my face burning with a shame so hot it felt like my skin was on fire, trying to wipe the sticky mess off my textbooks while the eyes of the entire lunchroom were on me. I started eating my lunch in a secluded corner of the library, my sad little sandwich my only companion. I was being systematically erased from the social landscape of the school. The true escalation, the moment that pushed me from quiet misery into a state of active terror, happened in the girls' locker room. The locker room was my personal hell, a brightly lit, echoey chamber of judgment where I was forced to display the body I so desperately tried to hide. I had a system. I would wait until everyone else had changed for gym class. Then I would change as quickly as possible in the cramped confines of a bathroom stall, my heart pounding with the fear of being discovered. One day I was in the stall, fumbling with my gym shorts, when I heard them come in. Jessica, Tiffany, and Brittany. They were laughing. "Oh my God, did you see the whale trying to run the mile today?" Tiffany snickered. I thought the ground was going to shake. "Seriously," Jessica said, her voice right outside my stall door. "It's so gross. Why does she even bother? She should just give up and accept her fate as a future circus freak." My blood ran cold. I stood frozen in the stall, my gym shirt halfway over my head, every muscle in my body locked in a state of pure primal fear. They knew I was in there. This was a performance for my benefit. Then, something small and white slid under the stall door. It was a folded piece of paper. My hands shaking, I bent down and picked it up. I unfolded it. It was one of my poems, a deeply personal, emotional poem I had written in my journal about feeling lonely and misunderstood. A poem I had submitted to Mr. Harrison for extra credit, and scrawled across the top of the page, in Jessica's loopy, perfect handwriting, were 2 words: pig poetry. Below the title, they had added their own annotations in bright pink ink. Next to a line about my heavy heart, they had drawn a cartoon pig with a thought bubble that said, "Oink! I'm so deep." Next to a line about feeling trapped, they had written, "Maybe try a bigger cage, fatty." Humiliation. It's a word, but it doesn't even begin to describe the feeling. It was a complete violation. They had taken the most secret, vulnerable part of my soul, the one thing I thought was truly mine, my voice, my words, and they had defiled it. They had turned my pain into a joke. I felt a wave of nausea so intense I had to grip the cold metal wall of the stall to keep from fainting. I could hear them outside, stifling their giggles, waiting for my reaction. I didn't give them one. I stayed in that stall, silent, my whole body trembling, until the final bell for gym class rang, and I heard them leave. I stayed there for the entire period, sitting on the cold, dirty floor, clutching that defaced piece of paper, my tears silently soaking into the thin tissue. I had never felt so utterly, completely alone. How had they gotten it? The only person who had seen that poem was Mr. Harrison. The thought was a fresh stab of pain. Had he shown it to someone? Had he left it on his desk? My one ally, my one supporter, had inadvertently provided them with the ultimate weapon. The pig poetry incident broke something inside me. The fear I had been living with curdled into a constant, low-grade dread. I started having trouble sleeping. I'd have nightmares about being trapped in the locker room, their laughter echoing around me. My grades, even in English, began to slip. My mind, once my sanctuary, was now a hostile territory, occupied by their voices. But Jessica wasn't done. The public humiliation was yet to come. Our high school had a yearly tradition, the Spring Fling Talent Show. It was a huge deal, the biggest social event of the season after prom. Jessica and her friends always did a dance routine, and they always won. This year, there was a new category, spoken word and original poetry. When Mr. Harrison announced it in class, his eyes lit up. He looked directly at me. "Zoe," he said, a warm, encouraging smile on his face, "this is perfect for you. You have to enter. You have to share your voice." A cold, sick feeling washed over me. The entire class turned to look at me. I could see the malicious, predatory gleam in Jessica's eyes from across the room. It was a dare, a trap. I don't think so, Mr. Harrison," I mumbled, my face burning. "Nonsense," he said, his kindness completely oblivious to the social death sentence he was delivering. "I'll even be one of the judges. It will be great. I expect to see your name on the sign-up sheet." For the next week, Jessica's campaign of terror intensified. Every time she saw me, she'd make oinking noises under her breath. She'd ask me in the hallway in a voice loud enough for everyone to hear, "Hey Zoe, working on your next big poem? I can't wait to hear it. It's going to be epic." Her friends would dissolve into laughter. She was building the anticipation. She was setting the stage for my public execution. I was trapped. If I didn't sign up, I would be letting Mr. Harrison down, the one person who believed in me, and I would look like a coward. If I did sign up, I would be willingly walking into the lion's den. I spent days in an agony of indecision. It was my grandmother who unknowingly helped me make the decision. I was at her house one weekend, quiet and withdrawn. She was mending one of my favorite sweaters. "What's eating you, my little songbird?" she asked, not looking up from her work. "Nothing," I mumbled. "Don't nothing me," she said, her needle moving in a steady rhythmic motion. "I know that look. That's the look of someone letting fear win." She bit off a thread and looked at me, her eyes sharp and clear. "Let me tell you something, Zoe. Fear is a bully. You can't hide from it. The more you run, the bigger it gets. The only way to beat a bully is to stand your ground, look it right in the eye, and speak your truth, even if your voice shakes. Her words hit me with the force of a physical blow. Speak your truth, even if your voice shakes. That Monday, my hands trembling so badly I could barely hold the pen, I walked up to the sign-up sheet in the main hallway and wrote my name down. Zoe Peterson. I now win it is. Spoken word. The night of the talent show felt like a surreal nightmare. The auditorium was packed, buzzing with the electric energy of 1,000 teenagers. I sat in the back, my heart pounding a frantic, irregular rhythm against my ribs. I had a new poem in my pocket, one I had written and rewritten 100 times. It was a poem about fear, about bullies, about the power of a voice. It was my truth. I watched Jessica and her friends perform their dance routine. They were flawless, all high kicks and synchronized smiles. The crowd went wild. They were the queens of this world, and I was the jester about to be sacrificed for their amusement. Then it was my turn. The host called my name. A smattering of polite applause, punctuated by a few loud oinking sounds from the back of the auditorium, followed by a wave of muffled laughter. My face burned. My legs felt like lead. I walked toward the stage, each step an eternity. The single spotlight felt like an interrogation lamp, exposing my every flaw to the sea of watching eyes. I got to the microphone. I unfolded my piece of paper. My hands were shaking so violently, the paper rattled. I looked out into the crowd. I saw them. Jessica, Tiffany, and Brittany, sitting in the third row, their faces alight with gleeful predatory anticipation. They were ready for the show. They were ready for my humiliation. I took a deep breath, my lungs tight and constrict. I opened my mouth to speak, and nothing came out. Not a word. My throat had closed up completely. The words were there in my head, but my body had betrayed me. I stood there, frozen in the spotlight, my mouth opening and closing like a fish, the paper shaking in my hands. The silence stretched. It was a vast, terrible, suffocating silence. And then, a single snicker from the third row. Then another. Another. And then the laughter started. It wasn't a wave. It was a tsunami. A roar of laughter that washed over me, drowned me, filled my ears. They were all laughing. At me. At the fat girl who thought she could be a poet. My vision started to go black at the edges. The roaring in my ears was deafening. I could feel a million pairs of eyes on me, their mockery like physical blows. My carefully constructed courage, my grandmother's words, Mr. Harrison's belief in me, it all shattered into a million pieces. I did the only thing I could do. I turned and fled. I ran off the stage, my own heavy footsteps echoing in the massive, laughing auditorium. I didn't stop. I ran down the hallway, out the school doors, and into the cold, dark night. I ran and ran, my lungs on fire, hot, silent tears of shame streaming down my face. I had looked the bully in the eye, and the bully had won. Jessica hadn't just humiliated me. She had done exactly what she set out to do. She had silenced me. And in that moment, running through the empty suburban streets, I made a promise to myself. I would never, ever try to use my voice again. It was too dangerous. It was too painful. The risk was not worth the reward. My words were my weakness. My writing was my shame. I would bury that part of myself so deep, it would never see the light of day again. The pig poet was dead. The night of the talent show was the end of a chapter, but it was also the beginning of a long, cold, silent winter for my soul. I kept the promise I made to myself. I silenced my voice. I took the stack of journals I had filled since I was a child, my secret worlds, my poems, my heart on paper, and I packed them into a cardboard box. I sealed the box with tape and shoved it into the deepest, darkest corner of my closet, burying it under old sweaters and forgotten shoes. It was a funeral. I was burying the only part of myself I had ever truly liked. The rest of high school was a blur of gray anonymity. I perfected the art of invisibility. I did my work, I got decent grades, and I spoke only when spoken to. I was a ghost, haunting the hallways. And that was exactly how I wanted it. Jessica and her friends, having achieved their ultimate victory, mostly left me alone. There was no sport in kicking a corpse. Their occasional smirks and whispers were just echoes of a battle they had already won. I never spoke in Mr. Harrison's class again, and the wounded, confused look in his kind eyes was a constant, painful reminder of my failure. My counterattack, when it began, was not a fiery explosion. It was a quiet, almost imperceptible shift in the tectonic plates of my own heart. It didn't happen overnight. It was a slow, 10-year process of thawing. The awakening moment was not a single dramatic event, but a series of small, quiet realizations. The first came when I left for college. I chose a large state university 1,000 miles away from my hometown, a place where no one knew me, where I had no history. For the first time, I was just Zoe. Not Zoe the ogre, or the pig poet. Just a face in the crowd. The absence of the constant, low-level threat of my bullies was a revelation. It was like a constant, high-pitched ringing in my ears had finally stopped, and the resulting silence was both liberating and terrifying. In this new anonymous world, I slowly began to rebuild. My war was not about revenge. The thought of Jessica and her friends barely crossed my mind. They were demons from a past life, and I was focused on my own exorcism. My war was about one thing: reclaiming the voice I had buried. The battle had two fronts. Front one, my body. I needed to make peace with the physical shell that had been the source of so much pain. Front two, my mind. I needed to find a new way to let my words out, a way that felt safe. The war on my body began not in a gym, but in the university swimming pool. I had always loved the water. It was the one place where my large body didn't feel heavy and clumsy, but buoyant and powerful. I started swimming laps late at night when the pool was nearly empty. The rhythmic pull and glide of my arms through the cool, quiet water, the muffled sound of my own breathing, the burn in my muscles. It was a form of meditation. In the water, I wasn't a size. I was just a body, moving, working, getting stronger. I wasn't trying to lose weight to please anyone or to fit into a certain mold. I was doing it for the feeling of strength, of competence, of reclaiming my physical self as an instrument of power, not an object of shame. Simultaneously, I began the long tentative siege on the fortress of silence I had built around my mind. I was an English major, of course. I still found my sanctuary in the words of others, but I was terrified of writing myself. The trauma of the pig poetry incident was a deep, unhealed wound. The thought of putting my own vulnerable thoughts on paper for someone else to judge was paralyzing. My breakthrough came, as it had before, from a teacher. He was a creative writing professor, Dr. Alistair Finch, a sharp, witty man with a reputation for being brutally honest, but also fiercely supportive of real talent. The final project for his class was a 20-page short story. I was dreading it. I spent weeks staring at a blank screen, the voices of Jessica and her friends whispering in my ear. "It's stupid. It's garbage. No one wants to read your piggy thoughts." I was on the verge of dropping the class when I had an idea. A way to write without feeling exposed. I created a pen name. I wrote a story about a shy, lonely girl who discovers a magical world, a world where she is a hero. It was pure fantasy, a story I could hide behind, but I poured all of my own buried emotions into it. The loneliness, the fear, the desperate yearning for a place to belong. I wrote with a frantic, desperate energy, and I submitted it under the name A.R. Winter. A week later, Dr. Finch asked A.R. Winter to stay after class. My heart was pounding. I walked up to his desk, my whole body trembling. He looked at me over the top of his glasses. "This," he said, tapping my story, "is exceptionally good. The world building is immersive, the characters are real, but most importantly, the emotional core is authentic. I felt it. Whoever this winter person is, she has a voice that deserves to be heard." He peered at me. "It's you, isn't it, Zoe?" Tears welled in my eyes. I just nodded, unable to speak. He gave me a kind, knowing smile. "I thought so. There's a truth in these pages that you can't fake." He leaned forward, his voice serious. "Zoe, I don't know what made you so afraid to use your own name, and it's none of my business, but a voice this powerful is meant to be used, not hidden. Don't let the ghosts, whoever they are, win." His words, so reminiscent of Mr. Harrison's, were a balm on my decade-old wound. The yos. He saw them. He understood. That day, I took the first tentative step out of my self-imposed prison. I started writing again, tentatively at first, then with a growing confidence. I started a blog, still anonymously, writing essays about books, about finding solace in stories, about the quiet struggles of feeling like an outsider. The struggles during this period were immense. There were days I would be crippled by imposter syndrome, convinced that every word I wrote was childish nonsense. There were weeks when the scale wouldn't budge, and the old familiar feelings of shame and frustration would bubble up. The ghosts were always there, whispering at the edges of my consciousness. But now, I had weapons to fight them with. I had the burn in my muscles after a long swim. I had the quiet validation of a handful of anonymous readers on my blog who would leave comments like, "This is exactly how I feel," or "Your words helped me today." Each small victory was a stone in my new foundation. After college, I got a low-level job at a publishing house in the city. It was a glorified mailroom position, but I was in the world of books. It was enough. I spent my days sorting manuscripts and my nights and weekends writing. My blog was growing, my voice was getting stronger, clearer. I was no longer just writing about books. I was writing about life, about overcoming anxiety, about the quiet power of introverts, about learning to love the body you're in. I was still fat. I was healthier, stronger, more active, but I was still, and always would be, a plus-size woman. But the difference was, I was no longer at war with my body. I was at peace with it. It was my home, and I was learning to decorate it with strength and self-respect. My big break, the event that launched the final phase of my counterattack, came about 5 years after college. I wrote a long, deeply personal essay on my blog. I finally told the story. I wrote about the talent show. I wrote about the laughter, about running off the stage, about the vow of silence I had made. But I didn't write it as a tragedy. I wrote it as an origin story. I wrote about how that moment of ultimate humiliation became the catalyst for my journey of self-discovery. I wrote about how my bullies, in their attempt to silence me, had inadvertently given me my life's mission, to help other people find their own voices. And at the end of the essay, for the first time ever, I signed my real name, Zoe Peterson. The response was a tidal wave. The essay went viral. It was shared thousands of times. My inbox was flooded with emails from people all over the world, people who had their own talent show stories, who felt seen and understood by my words. I had spent a decade feeling utterly alone in my shame, and I suddenly discovered I was part of a massive, silent army. That essay became the foundation for my first book, a collection of essays titled The Phoenix Project: How to Rise from the Ashes of Your Past. I sent the proposal to an editor at the publishing house where I worked, my heart in my throat. She called me into her office a week later, my manuscript in her hands, her eyes red. "I was the fat kid too," she whispered, and she gave me a book deal. The next 2 years were a whirlwind. The book was published, and to my utter astonishment, it became a bestseller. I was invited to speak at small events, then larger ones. The first time I stood out on a stage behind a microphone since that terrible night was the most terrifying moment of my life. My voice shook, but I spoke my truth, and people listened. My career as a motivational speaker and writer took off. I had finally done it. I had built a life, a career, a platform, not by changing my body to fit the world, but by using my voice to change the world to fit me. I had looked the bully in the eye, the real bully, the fear inside me, and this time, I had not run. The email that set the final scene in motion arrived on a Tuesday morning. It was from the Northwood High School Alumni Association. They were organizing a 10-year reunion, a big, formal affair. Tucked into the details about the dinner, and the DJ was a special announcement. As part of the weekend's events, they were hosting a professional development and inspiration seminar. And they wanted to know if I, Zoe Peterson, best-selling author of The Phoenix Project, would be the keynote speaker. I stared at the email, my heart doing a strange, complicated dance of irony and terror. Northwood High, the scene of the crime, the place where my voice had been publicly executed, and they wanted me to come back to stand on a stage and speak. The universe, it seemed, had a wicked sense of humor. A part of me wanted to delete the email and pretend I'd never seen it. The ghosts of those hallways were powerful. The thought of walking back into that building, of potentially seeing them, made the 15-year-old girl inside me want to curl up in a ball and hide. But the 28-year-old woman I had become, she saw it for what it was. It wasn't a threat. It was an opportunity. Not for revenge. Not to gloat. It was an opportunity to close a circle, to stand on the very ground where I had been silenced, and to speak my truth, not as a terrified girl, but as a powerful woman. It was the final battle of a 10-year war, and I knew I had to fight it. I replied and accepted. I set my speaking fee, my standard corporate rate, which was not insignificant. A few weeks later, I received a check and a list of confirmed attendees who had paid the registration fee for the seminar. And there they were. 3 names that leapt off the page and punched me in the gut. Jessica Miller, Danielle, Tiffany Davies, Brittany Clark, Diane Young. They had paid. They had paid money to hear me speak. The sheer, mind-bending absurdity of it was almost too much to process. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. What were their lives like now? Did they even remember me? Did they remember what they had done? Or was I just a forgotten casualty in the careless war of their adolescence? The night of the seminar, I stood backstage in the Northwood High auditorium. It was the same stage. The exact same stage. They had renovated it, but I could still feel the ghost of that single merciless spotlight. I could still hear the echo of 1,000 teenagers laughing. My heart was pounding, a familiar, frantic rhythm. My palms were sweating. For a moment, I was 15 again, the terrified girl with the rattling piece of paper in her hand. But then I took a deep breath. I looked down at my outfit, a sleek, powerful, custom-tailored crimson pantsuit. I felt the solid weight of my own strong, healthy body. I thought of my best-selling book, of the thousands of emails from people I had helped. I thought of the 10 years of quiet, relentless work that had brought me to this exact spot. The fear was still there, but it was no longer in charge. It was just a passenger now. The principal of the school, a man I didn't recognize, went on stage to introduce me. He listed my accomplishments, the success of my book, the national media appearances. He was introducing a powerful, successful woman. He had no idea he was standing on the very spot where that woman had been born, in a crucible of shame and laughter. And then he said, my name. Please join me in welcoming home one of Northwood's own, Zoe Peterson. I walked out onto the stage. The applause was warm, genuine. The spotlight felt different this time. It wasn't an interrogation lamp. It was a welcoming embrace. I walked to the microphone, my steps steady, my head held high, and I looked out at the audience. And I saw them. They were sitting in the 3rd row, right in the center. Jessica, Tiffany, and Brittany. 10 years had changed them. The effortless, golden confidence of their youth had been replaced by something else, a kind of brittle, carefully maintained adulthood. Jessica looked tired, the lines around her eyes telling a story of stress and disappointment. Tiffany looked bored, scrolling on her phone. Brittany was a little heavier, and she had the frazzled, exhausted look of a young mother. They were just women, ordinary women, carrying the ordinary burdens of life. They were no longer the terrifying mythic monsters of my memory. They were just people, and they were looking up at me, their faces a mixture of curiosity and a dawning, horrified recognition. Jessica's jaw was slightly agape. Her eyes were wide. She remembered. Oh, she definitely remembered. I took a moment. I let the silence hang. And then I began to speak. "Good evening, Northwood," I said, my voice clear and strong, amplified by the microphone, filling the entire auditorium. It is a strange and powerful thing to be back on this stage. I didn't start with my usual, canned speech. I started with my truth. The last time I stood on this stage, I was 15 years old, I said, my eyes finding Jessica's in the crowd. I saw her flinch. I was here to read a poem for the Spring Fling talent show. I had a piece of paper in my hand, a piece of my own soul that I had foolishly decided to share with the world. But when I opened my mouth, nothing came out. I was so terrified, so consumed with the fear of being judged, that I was struck completely silent. A hush fell over the room. This was not the motivational speech they were expecting. This was something else. This was a confession. And then I continued, my voice unwavering. The laughter started. It felt like a tidal wave. And in that moment, I learned what I thought was a vital lesson for survival. That my voice was a liability. That my thoughts were a weakness. That the safest thing I could possibly do was to be silent. I paused, letting the weight of the memory settle in the room. I looked right at Jessica, Tiffany, and Brittany. Their faces were pale. Tiffany had put her phone down. They were all staring at me, their eyes wide with a mixture of shock, and for the first time a glimmer of shame. I spent the next 10 years of my life honoring that vow of silence, I said. I buried my voice, I hid my thoughts, and I tried to make myself as small as possible. But the funny thing about burying something that's alive is that it doesn't die. It just grows in the dark. And my voice, my real voice, was growing. It was getting stronger, fed by a decade of observation, of quiet learning, of unlearning the lies I had been told about my own worth. The story of how It's a story about realizing that our greatest wounds are often the source of our greatest strengths. It's about understanding that the things that make us different are not our flaws. They are our superpower. My sensitivity, the thing that made me such an easy target for bullies, became my empathy as a writer. My size, the thing that made me feel so monstrous and visible, taught me how to see the people that society tries to make invisible. My shame became the fuel for my mission. I spent the next hour telling my story, but I never named them. I didn't have to. Their own memories were doing the work for me. I could see it on their faces. I talked about the power of words, both to destroy and to build. I talked about the architecture of self-esteem, about how to build a life that is so strong, so authentic, that the ghosts of the past have no power over you. When I finished, there was a moment of stunned silence, and then the auditorium erupted in a standing ovation. It was a roar of applause, of empathy, of shared understanding. It was the sound that erased the memory of that other sound, the sound of laughter, from a decade ago. After the talk, there was a book signing in the lobby. The line was long. One by one, my former classmates came up to me, their faces full of a respect I had never seen before. Some of them apologized. I never said anything to stop them, one woman whispered, her eyes full of tears. I was a coward. I'm so sorry. And then, at the end of the line, they were there. Jessica, Tiffany and Brittany. They stood together, looking awkward and ashamed. Jessica was holding a copy of my book. She stepped forward, her eyes on the floor. "Zoe," she said, her voice small and shaky, a ghost of its former queen bee confidence. We just wanted to say, we're sorry." Tiffany and Brittany just nodded, their faces pale. "What you said up there," Jessica continued, finally looking up at me, her eyes swimming with a confusing mixture of emotion. "We were just stupid kids. We were mean. And we were jealous. What Mr. Harrison said about your writing, I was so jealous. And I was a monster about it. There's no excuse. I'm so sorry for what we did to you." I looked at the three of them, these women who were once the architects of my deepest pain, and I felt a strange, quiet sense of peace. The rage was gone. The hurt was a distant, faded scar. The 15-year-old girl inside me wanted to scream at them, to make them feel a fraction of the pain they had caused me. But the 28-year-old woman I had become, she just felt a quiet, profound sense of closure. My victory wasn't this moment. It wasn't their apology. Their apology was for them, not for me. It was a way for them to ease their own conscience. My victory had happened over 10 years, in quiet, lonely moments of choosing to fight for myself. My victory was the book in her hand. My victory was the life I had built. Being fat is not a sin. Using someone's body as a weapon against their soul is. The real sin is allowing the cruelty of others to become the narrator of your own story. It's letting their definitions confine you to a life that is smaller than your own magnificent potential. To everyone watching, to anyone who has ever been bullied, to anyone who carries the ghosts of a cruel past, your story is not over. It is not their story to write. You get to write the ending. And you can write a damn good one. You can take the very stones they threw at you, and you can build a stage, a fortress, a cathedral. The work is long, and it is hard, and you have to do it for yourself. But on the other side of that work is a freedom, and a power, and a voice that no one can ever silence again. I signed her book. I wrote, "To Jessica, may you always choose kindness." And I handed it back to her, my smile genuine, my heart at peace. I had faced the ghosts, and I had won. That night, after the seminar, I went for a walk around my old hometown. It was strange to see it all again. The streets looked smaller, the houses looked different. The places that had once seemed so huge and intimidating in my memory were now just places, ordinary. The power they held over me was gone, because the fear was gone. I walked past the school, and this time there were no ghosts. I had faced them, and I had set myself free. My life now is a testament to the power of rewriting your own story. I'm still a writer, still a speaker. I get to travel the world and share my message with thousands of people. My work isn't about telling people to forget their past or to just get over it. It's about teaching them how to use it, how to take the ugliest, most painful parts of their story and reforge them into their greatest sources of strength, empathy, and purpose. The Unix project has become more than a book. It's a movement, a community of people who are all rising from the ashes of their own unique paths. And I found love. A real, quiet, and profoundly supportive love with a man who fell in love with my voice before he ever knew what I looked like. He was a reader of my blog for years. He loves the mind that Mr. Harrison and Dr. Finch first saw. He celebrates my strength, and he creates a safe space for my vulnerability. And my body, he just calls it home. Sharing this story, the full story of the talent show, the pig poetry, all of it. It's like letting a final bit of poison out of a very old wound. It doesn't hurt to tell it anymore. And that's because of you. Because this community we've built right here has become the safest stage in the world. Your support, your comments, your shared stories. They are a constant, powerful reminder that none of us are alone in our past battles. You turn my personal story into our collective strength. So, I'm asking you one more time to help me build this community even stronger. If my story of finding my voice has inspired you, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to hit that notification bell so you can be a part of our next conversation. Every single subscription adds another voice to our chorus, and together we are creating a sound that can drown out any ghost. And now, this is for you. I want you to go to the comments and tell me about the ghosts you're fighting. What was a moment when someone tried to silence you, and how did you, or how are you, working to find your voice again? Share your story of speaking your truth, even if your voice shook. I promise, I will be reading every single one. Your stories are a lighthouse for others who might still be lost in the fog. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening with such open hearts. Remember, your story is yours to write, and you have a voice that the world needs to hear. Don't ever let anyone convince you to be silent. Love you all, your Zoe. See you in the next story.